The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Man, I wish I could play the guitar like Phil Keaggy. Gee whiz. Wouldn't that be something?
A virtuoso from age 18 on. Just one of those remarkable musicians. He would have been good in any genre.
Oh, my gosh.
He chose rock and roll.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome, listeners, to Walking Through the Language of the Heart. If this is the first time you've joined us, I want you to know that you can catch up on all these shows by visiting our website at take12radio.com and clicking on the Recovery Workshops banner. We have been going through, and I say we, as myself and Chris S., have been going through this book, The Language of the Heart, Bill W.'s Grapevine writings from 1944 to 1970. And this episode is actually the last article in segment 1. And it's entitled Guardian of AA, Our General Service Conference. Launch us forth, Chris.
Absolutely, Monty. It's really good to be here. And it's actually good to be finishing up section 1. So this is the last article. He's going to be telling us about the General Service Conference. He's done that.
Yeah.
This is probably going to be a very, very concise, and we're going to move on to some really fun stuff next week. This kind of finishes up the structure. He's talking about the structure, the architecture that he's put together for Alcoholics Anonymous, and talked a lot of people into participating in.
Right.
You gotta admire Bill for being able to get so many people to buy in to his ideas of how this thing should be run. And to this day, it's pretty much run the way he envisioned it back in the 50s.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting.
It's funny because we're often accused of, those of us that are in 12-step recovery and in the rooms are often accused of being control freaks. And my answer to that is, well, first of all, what's your point? and secondly, well, of course, because it works.
How else are you going to get everybody to do everything?
That's right.
So yeah, thank God for Bill in the 50s and what he did. Thank God for him.
Yeah.
In the 30s, 40s, 60s, everything. But here we go. This is called Guardian of AA, Our General Service Conference, and it was written in April 1958. So this is I think the first article that's written during the period of time I was alive on this planet. So let's see what it says here, Monty. Every AA wants to make sure of his survival from alcoholism and his own spiritual well-being afterward. This is just as it should be. He also wants to do what he can for the survival and well-being of his fellow alcoholics. Therefore, he is bound to have a vital interest in the permanence and well-being of AA itself. Right there he sums up, even if we're still acting completely out of self-interest,
yeah,
we want to help Alcoholics Anonymous because that's in our self-interest. In his AA group, every good member feels deeply about this. He knows once the miracle of sobriety has been received, that Providence expects all of us to work and to grow, to do our part in maintaining our blessings in full force. A perpetual miracle with no effort or responsibility on our part simply isn't in the cards. We all understand that the price of both personal and group survival is willingness and sacrifice, vigilance, and work. This is one of the things you don't hear as much in the rooms,
No.
like you used to, Monty, about our responsibility to put an effort into this and to be helpful. Bill certainly knew how
Yeah.
important that was. What is so true for each AA member and for each AA group must also be true for AA as a whole. Yet many of us have never given this self-evident proposition the thought it deserves. We are apt to take it for granted that AA as a whole will go on forever, no special attention or contribution being required of us, save an occasional glow of pride in AA's size and reach. It is possible that half of AA members and groups still have little active concern for the total welfare. That isn't negligent on our part at all. They simply haven't seen the need. There are two good reasons for this. One is that AA as a whole has never run into any trouble. The other is that until recently, a small group of AA old-timers acting as parents have tended to the perils and problems of our whole society without consulting the membership very much about such matters. Never have we had a problem that cut clear across us. The public admires us. Our friends love us. Religion and medicine are in our corner. Nobody has seriously exploited us. We have avoided public controversy. The world's political strife hasn't touched us. We haven't had even one full-size family quarrel. While members and groups have had just about all the woe there is, AA as a whole has never had any. This is the miracle of our 23 years of existence. You know, that is interesting because certainly groups can blow up. Sponsor-sponsee relationships can blow up. Everything can blow up left, right, and sideways, right, Monty?
Sure.
But the whole, I think to this day really hasn't had a serious challenge. I think there are things at work today that marginalize and minimize Alcoholics Anonymous's legitimacy and reach more than there were back in the 50s. You know, modern medicine and you know, the business of alcoholism treatment. But all in all, you know, we haven't blown up. Every considerable sized town in America has a group, right?
I would agree with that. I noticed that in my home group, it's amazing. I know, because I know the people pretty well, there is such a mixture of political views and spiritual views and views on everything from A to Z, and yet it's just that just doesn't seem to enter in to the fellowship when we're together. And it's almost like it doesn't even take any effort. It's just not an issue. It's a non-issue. Our brotherhood, our friendship, our camaraderie, and our purpose to help the newcomer is always at the forefront. And I don't necessarily see that in all groups, but it definitely is alive and well in many. And again, it's almost like not on our part, but it's like Bill says, it's providence, I think.
Yeah, there's almost an organic understanding of how important a group is. I'll tell you one quick story. Every once in a while, the coffee maker would get drunk. You know how that is, right?
Yeah.
And they're usually the ones with the key, you know, to the building. And this one time, the coffee maker didn't show up, and we're all standing around outside, and it's 8 o'clock. it's time for the meeting. I remember being so serious. I was leading this beginners meeting. I'm being so serious about getting us in there. We have to get in there, Monty. That I started walking around the building looking for open windows, so that I could open a window and kind of break in and then open the doors for everybody. I'm sure the pastor would understand. Yeah. And as I'm looking up and walking, I walk in to an air conditioning pit. It was a pit about 5 feet deep with air conditioning equipment, and I fall right into it on my face onto all these pipes and rebar and Kindorf and all this. I mean, I was hurt pretty bad, and I remember almost not being able to climb out of this hole, and nobody saw me do it because it was around the back of the building, as I'm trying to break in, right?
Wow.
And I remember climbing out of this hole, bloodied and bruised up, and by this time someone had gotten a key from somebody that had a key, and the door was open, and I remember staggering in there, clutching my cuts and bruises, and sitting down and leading the meeting.
Wow.
I mean, it was like, So you recognize that. Please don't puncture the life raft. Don't sit down in the life raft with a fork in your back pocket. It's like there's a protective mechanism, I think, built into us.
Sure.
Especially in our early days.
Wow, that's a great story.
No wonder so many truly believe that nothing can ever happen to AA itself. That we have been so long exempt from the pains that all nations and societies must suffer is something for the deepest gratitude. But we certainly cannot presume that this benign phenomena will last forever. For one, I do not think it should last. We can never call ourselves grown up until we have successfully met with all those temptations and problems that invariably harass every large grouping of men and women. This will be good for us. Very good, I'm sure. Wow. He's basically saying a heavy-duty trial or tribulation is going to make us stronger. That's a very positive way of looking at this, and a very humble way, too, because if there was one person that didn't want AA damaged, it was certainly Bill Wilson.
Bill, yeah.
Someday we may have to resist all the pressure that a destruction-bent world can put upon us in this craziest and most perilous century that the human race has ever seen. They haven't seen this one yet.
I have to laugh. I just have to laugh because the more things change, the more they remain the same, right? I mean, gee whiz, this could be written yesterday.
I bet they never expected that an illness would spread across America and close down every single meeting.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I think Bill would have qualified that up there with one of the trial and tribulations that would make us stronger. And I think it did. I think it did make us stronger.
Yeah.
As a fellowship, we shall always need to make whatever sacrifices are necessary to ensure AA's unity, service, and survival, under any condition whatsoever. That is why I'm now writing to you about AA's General Service Conference, the guardian of our future. Now, I read the title earlier, and I want to know why he thinks the General Service Conference is the guardian of AA.
Yeah.
I really do, because I don't know right now that I agree with that.
I was going to say I don't.
But let's see what kind of an argument he makes.
Okay.
Until recently, we have behaved like a silly young family. This family, like all family, has had parents. These parents have been the so-called old-timers and originators of AA. I was fortunate enough to have been one of them. Since the earliest days, we parents have been more concerned with the future welfare of AA than with anything else. At local levels, we old-timers used to look after things, until very recently Dr. Bob and I, mightily assisted by dedicated alcoholic and non-alcoholic friends, have been doing the same at national and international levels. As parents of AA, we had to see to it that our growing brood was protected against itself and against the world outside. Very early, our family had to have principles to live by and schooling in those principles. The good news of AA had to be spread far and wide so that we could grow in numbers as well as in quality. Such were our responsibilities. It was in 1937 when Dr. Bob and I first began to see what we must do. We knew there would have to be an AA text of principles and methods. Other old-timers agreed. By 1939, with lots of help, we had published the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. This ended all doubt about AA's methods. The 300,000 big books today in circulation constitute the platform of recovery upon which our whole fellowship stands. I want to read those two sentences again, Monty, because I think a lot of people have forgotten this.
Yeah.
It says, when the book Alcoholics Anonymous was published, that ended all doubt about AA's methods. The big books in circulation today constitute the platform of recovery upon which our whole fellowship stands. And he says this while he's spending 98% of his attention on building the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is not the program.
Right.
The service structure is not the program. The traditions are not the program. The concepts are not the program. So that's very interesting that he's going back to first principles, which are personal recovery. We next realized that AA would have to have publicity, lots of it, and the right kind. We commenced work on this problem. Maybe half of today's members owe their lives and their fortunes to the telling efforts of the press and other means of communication. From 1940 to 1950, we were beset by group problems of every sort, frightening beyond description. Out of these experiences, the 12 traditions of AA were forged, traditions that now protect us against ourselves and the world outside. This effort, requiring immense office correspondence and experience, finally resulted in a whole new literature dealing with AA's unity and service. Under these influences, we grew solid. The news of AA began to spread around the world, finally reaching into 70 lands. This brought a host of new problems and the need to publish AA literature in many tongues. Hospitals and prisons and loners and men on ships also had to be reached and helped. AA's lifelines had to extend everywhere. AA needed a monthly magazine. Today, the AA Grapevine reaches 40,000 subscribers, plus countless thousands of others each month. These have been the duties and privileges of our parenthood worldwide. We did our best to protect AA so that it could grow undisturbed. Not troubling the growing family about these critical matters, we acted on the principle that Father knows best. In the early days, it was just as simple as that. It was then far too soon to throw the full weight of responsibility onto our whole fellowship. And I'm kind of glad he didn't, because we can be a bunch of wackadoos, can't we, Monty?
Absolutely.
From the beginning, Dr. Bob and I found that we needed special help ourselves. Therefore, we called upon certain dedicated non-alcoholics to give us a lift. With these men, we formed a trusteeship for Alcoholics Anonymous. It was created way back in 1938, and we called it the Alcoholic Foundation, since renamed the General Service Board of AA. In 1940, our trustees acquired the AA book, assumed full responsibility for AA's general funds, its World Service Office, its magazine, and its public relations. To this body of trustees, alcoholic and non-alcoholic, must go most of the credit for making our world headquarters what it is now. I am very glad that this issue of the Grapevine carries the pictures of two of our distinguished non-alcoholic chairmen of the board, men whose steadfastness saw us through a long season of labor and peril. In the faces of Leonard Harrison and Bernard Smith, you can see what these men are. And in our new book, AA Comes of Age, you can read what they and others like them did for us in our pioneering time as the moving drama of AA unfolded. It really, when Bill wanted help, he would go to the people he thought could help him the most. And these early non-alcoholic members, maybe there wasn't anything on TV, but these early members got really involved and really were helpful to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believe added some legitimacy to what AA was. if all these doctors and lawyers and clergy, if all of them could agree that AA was a good thing, that was really adding some legitimacy. And Bill fought for that. He fought for those endorsements and those cooperation and service service positions for those non-alcoholics.
I don't think people realize how much footwork, how much dedication and time and effort this man put into doing that, amongst a lot of other things that he was doing. I mean, he was all over the map, trying to connect every single dot for the survival of this fellowship.
Yeah, and when he had to, he would stump the country. He did that multiple times, just start getting on trains and going everywhere. And letting groups know he was going to be in town and that he needed to talk to them. And, he did so much in those early days that, we experience what we experience today because of that.
And I think, Chris, that's why it's important for people that claim membership in this fellowship, why they dig deeper than just, I don't want to sound like I'm minimizing the step work. I'm not. But I think once we've had that spiritual awakening as a result of those steps, once we've gotten into some form of service, once we're helping our fellows and so forth, I think it behooves us to do things like read this book, like read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, AA Comes of Age, etc., because it's in this that we learn to appreciate the way this whole thing was put together. Most people that I talk to, when you refer to Dr. Bob, they either love him or they think he's a shyster. You know what I mean? But that's all they really know. They have no clue. I didn't, until I started digging into some of this stuff several years ago. I remember cracking open Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and it blew my mind. I was like, I'm not hearing any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to do.
Personally, this society and this program saved my life. I'd have been dead 30 plus years ago.
Sure.
If it wasn't for the prolonged abstinence and recovery I've experienced. So that gives me interest in what this thing is. This is the thing that saved my life. I think it's incumbent upon me to understand as much about it as I can, especially being that I'm expected to help other alcoholics. I want to be informed on what I'm helping them with. I do not want to be the guy saying, here's a dime, call me when you get in a jackpot, I'll see you at the meeting. I mean, listen, it's not like either of those two things are bad. It's just that there's so much more to the responsibility of helping other people. And understanding Alcoholics Anonymous makes it easier to make fewer mistakes when trying to help people.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yep, it does.
During the year 1948, we workers at AA headquarters got a terrific jolt. Dr. Bob was stricken with a consuming and slowly fatal malady. This created a severe crisis in our affairs because it made us face up to the fact that the old-time parents of our society weren't going to last forever. We were filled with foreboding as we realized how insecure were the existing links between our headquarters and the vast sprawling fellowship that it served. There was, of course, our small board of trustees, but not one AA in 1,000 could name half of them. At the headquarters office, there were Bobby, Ann, and Charlotte. There were Dr. Bob and myself. We few were just about the only links to worldwide AA. Meanwhile, thousands of our members went serenely about their business. They knew little or nothing about AA's overall problems. They vaguely supposed that God, with maybe a slight assist from Dr. Bob and me, would go right on handling them. Thus, they were completely ignorant of the actual state of our affairs and of the awful potential there was for an ultimate collapse. Wow. I'm really starting, this is like the fourth or fifth time he's talked about this, right? About the coming of age. And I'm starting to get it now. I'm starting to get what he was worried about. So many people relied upon him in the New York office, not necessarily the trustees. They would meet, bi-monthly or something, right? Well, but day to day, he was handling so many things, and the people in the office were handling so many things. What would happen if there wasn't someone in the office to handle some of these things? So I'm really starting to understand why this service structure became literally an obsession of his to put this thing together.
I think he understood very early on the dangers of being man dependent, and we see this all the time, right? We see people that maybe attend a home group, and if a couple of the main players in the home group have been there for years, something happens. But maybe they relapse. Maybe they move. They got a better job and they move. Or maybe it's their pastor or their rabbi or who or their spiritual leader where they worship, and the guy moves, and then they leave. Right. Well, and in fact, I read a post the other day about somebody who said their favorite AA speaker wasn't at their home group anymore, so they just didn't feel like going there anymore. And I thought, wow, you're kidding me. And I think he's understood that, and he was afraid that if people's dependence were on the founders, that it was going to be the death of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Bill's later understanding of dependence.
Yeah,
dependence was a condition that we needed to shift as quickly as possible to dependence upon things human to dependence upon things spiritual.
Yeah.
So that all fits in with this particular article as well.
Yeah.
Listen, God will not render us white as snow without our cooperation.
Yeah.
Alcoholics Anonymous is not going to run spiritually and without any problems without our cooperation. So then how shall we cooperate? He's been giving us so much information on that in this book. It was a racking dilemma. Somehow, AA as a whole, would have to take over the full responsibility. Without doubt, the groups would have to elect numerous delegates and send them to New York each year, where they could sit with and guide the trustees. Only by so doing could the increasing isolation of the trustees from the movement itself be halted. Only such a body could take binding decisions in any future crisis. This is interesting. He said numerous delegates and send them to New York where they could guide the trustees. So basically it looks like this. There's a GSR. And the GSR meets with the DCM. All the GSRs meet with the DCM. All the DCMs meet with the trustees, right? All the trustees or all the delegates meet with the trustees, and it's supposed to. We talked about this last week. There's a feedback loop that he's putting together, and he really believed that these delegates that would be elected would be guiding the trustees. And again, I don't see a huge amount of that,
happening
from my perspective. It could be because I'm not involved at that kind of level, but I'm wondering, whether that directionary, trajectory is still working, because I do see the boards making decisions that aren't based on feedback from groups. They'll just make an arbitrary decision and it'll be wrong.
Yeah. You talk to the groups about certain things that are coming down the pike, and they look at you like, I didn't hear about that. I didn't know anything about that. We went to the last service conference and none of that stuff was talked about. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, so if it's not operating properly, we can't even have the opportunity to influence the board. So again, thank God for the people who are informed group members that do these service positions. When our scheme for a joint conference of trustees and delegates was first proposed, a howl went up countrywide. At first, it looked as though the AA family didn't want any part of this new and unexpected responsibility. To them, AA delegates spelled nothing but politics, controversy, and confusion. Let's keep it simple, they cried.
Yes, they do.
But after a couple of years of agitation and education, our fellowship clearly realized that the ultra simplicity of the early days could be no more. Direct family responsibility there would have to be, or else AA would fold up at its very center. The erstwhile elders, fathers, and founders would have to be taken off the hook and replaced by delegates. There was no other way. The family would have to come of age or suffer dire penalties for the failure to do so. So we called in some 75 delegates from the United States and Canada. Together with the trustees and the headquarters and the Grapevine staff, these delegates formed themselves into the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous. By then, it was 1951. At first, this was an experiment, pure and simple. If it worked, it would mean that AA had truly come of age and could really manage its own affairs. Through its representative conference, it could become the guardian of its own future and the protector of its own lifelines and service. Well, our conference did work. Its performance, God be thanked, exceeded all our expectations. At the end of its 5-year experimental period, we knew that it could become a permanent part of our fellowship. In July 1955, at the AA's 20th anniversary, I stood before the great St. Louis convention amid a dwindling band of old-timers, and on their behalf I delivered the destiny of AA into the hands of its chosen representatives, the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous. I cannot remember any happier day in my life. A gaping chasm had been bridged. AA was secure at last. Now really think about the humility that one would have to be speaking like this. In other words, I'm not running it anymore. I've put together a management team.
Yeah.
And the management team is going to run it. And this is all to the good. And I needed to do this to protect alcohol. It was really, I could see so many different types of personalities hanging on to whatever control or authority or respect they had from an organization until the bitter end. You know what I mean? And very begrudgingly handing over any of the reins.
Right.
And Bill was the opposite of that. This is very cool. Some people still ask these questions. Will the AA family send to the conference its finest delegates? Will we continue to choose able and wise trustees? Will AAs back their conference members, their trustees, and their world headquarters with enough funds, enough interest, and enough understanding? For me, these are questions no longer. The history of AA shows that wherever a great need arises, that need is always met. In this respect, I'm quite sure that our history will go on repeating itself. Indeed, I have no doubt whatever. You know, something that leads me to believe that this even can be true at a group level. Have you ever had a group where you just couldn't fill any of the service commitments?
Yes. Yes.
But people stepped up.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Maybe they weren't elected, but they stepped up where they saw a really important need, you know, like making coffee or opening the door or whatever.
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely.
I think, too, that my own influence at the headquarters should continue to lessen. Through its conference, complete authority and responsibility is now fully vested in AA. The parent who overstays his time can only hamper the growth of his offspring. Thus, I must not do. This I must not do. My proper place will soon be along the sidelines, cheering you newer ones as you carry on. Our family is now fully of age, and it should firmly remind me of that fact if I am ever again tempted to take charge. For these all compelling reasons, my friends, the future belongs to you. Embrace these new responsibilities eagerly. Fear not, and the grace of God will surely be yours.
Wow. Hey, I can't imagine what the emotion and the heartbreak in a good way that Bill must have felt. I mean, it's one thing. I mean, we know what it's like to raise kids. I mean, our job is to prepare them to be a success in a world that would like to chew them up and spit them out, and then we do our best. We raise them in a way that we think will be beneficial for them and the world around them, and then we release them. And sometimes we reel them back in a little bit, but then we release them some more, reel them back in, release them some more, until finally they're completely out of the nest. I wonder, because this was huge. I mean, there's thousands of people involved, and to be able to stand in front of this fellowship and say, my job here is complete. Wow.
Go forth, be fruitful, multiply.
Right. That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. Well,
it is, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful today because what happened was groups fed groups that fed groups that fed groups that fed groups that ended up helping me. And I really hope that this continues. I hope, I hope Alcoholics Anonymous stays ridiculously healthy and continues to be a place where people can find the solution to the illness, alcoholism. I truly hope that.
Yeah. Me too. Well, another good episode. Listeners, next week, we're going into segment 2 entitled Let's Be Friendly with Our Friends. And I am excited about this. It's the theme of this whole thing is kind of shifting, less technical and more, I don't know, what would you call it, Chris?
More interpersonal.
Interpersonal, yeah.
So how do we relate ourselves to our friends?
Right.
A real public relations type of thing. Because, some of the titles that we're going to be covering in the weeks to come are the psychiatrists, the physicians, the clergy, right? Press, radio, television. It's going to really be interesting to meet the non-alcoholic trustees. Salute to Canada. We'll have to get our friend Marty involved in that one. But
that'd be cool.
As he's able to back away from the day-to-day management of this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, he's able to stretch out into new areas of endeavor. And new writings. He'll be able to write about specific topics.
Right.
We're going to be coming up on a classic fairly soon, which is emotional sobriety.
I love it.
That has turned into one of the most important spiritual writings of the last 150 years.
And I'm gonna give Dr. Alan Berger a plug here because I think. He really is not a pioneer because Bill did this emotional sobriety thing. In fact, he referred to it as the next frontier. But Dr. Berger has picked up that gauntlet and just ran with it and has done amazing work as an author, as a PhD. And, of course, we have many of his workshops here at Take 12 Recovery Radio. But I love the whole emotional sobriety thing. I said something about emotional sobriety in a meeting the other day, and some people looked at me like I was from another planet. It was great. I loved it. They go, well, I don't know about emotional sobriety, but blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, well, you need to.
That's the same person who will say that you never recover.
That's right.
Or take what you want, leave the rest.
Right.
Or there's so many of those one-liners that really can be more dangerous than helpful.
Yeah. That's great. One-liners. We ought to do a series on one-liners one of these days. The blah, 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 blahs, right? All right, listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Listen all the way to the end of the sign-off so you know how to catch up on all of the shows. All right, Chris, thank you so much, my brother. Family, friends, you can email us at take12radio@comcast.net. Until our next broadcast, this is the Monty'man along with Chris S., and we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you.
For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof, woof.